She was branded unfit to be a mother until an unexpected baby shower invite arrived. From her billionaire ex, the cream-colored envelope felt heavier than paper. Its weight pressing into Imani Langston's palm while her phone screen blazed. With capital letters that cut deeper than any blade, unfit to be a mother, time seemed to stop in that narrow hallway outside the courtroom, her breath catching somewhere between her throat and her chest as a seagull's cry pierced through the window. The Grayson Cade Foundation seal stared up at her, elegant and official, mocking her with its pristine gold embossing. Her fingers trembled as they found the envelope's edge, the paper tearing with a sound that felt too loud in the sudden silence. Inside, an invitation printed on cardstock so expensive it felt like silk, a baby shower hosted by the man who'd shattered her world, scheduled for the exact day the court would decide if she could keep her son. Welcome, new and returning family. This is Mr. Steele Rich Stories, where we explore the moments that transform ordinary people into extraordinary survivors. If powerful, real-life lessons wrapped in gripping narratives feed your spirit, hit subscribe and ring the bell right now, because these stories come straight from the streets, the courtrooms, and the hearts that refuse to break. Drop "I'm locked in" the comments below so I know you're ready for this journey, and share this with someone who needs to hear that their circumstances don't define their worth. What do you do when the state stamps you unfit based on your zip code and bank balance, while the billionaire who abandoned you suddenly wants to throw you the baby shower of the century? How do you stand in a room full of people who see your poverty as proof of inadequacy, while carrying a child whose father treats love like a business transaction? Stay until the very end, because the moment that determines who's truly fit to raise this child will challenge everything you believe about worthiness, wealth, and what makes a real parent. Harborview existed in the spaces between what tourists photographed and what residents survived. Etta Washington had lived there 43 years, raised 6 children in a 2-bedroom apartment where the radiator clanged like Sunday church bells, and she'd distilled all that living into one truth: love ain't what you say, baby. Love is what shows up. She said it while braiding hair on stoops, while stirring pots of collard greens that fed whoever knocked, while holding crying mothers whose sons wouldn't come home. The neighborhood breathed with its own rhythm, seagulls arguing over fishing, boat scraps at dawn, industrial dryers humming from the 24-hour laundromat, salt air mixing with coffee steam from corner bodegas, where old men played dominoes until their wives called them home. 3 blocks from Etta's apartment, past the check-cashing place and the beauty supply store, with wigs displayed like crown jewels, Warm Light Bakery drew lines every Saturday morning. Imani had opened it with her grandmother's recipes and a loan that barely covered the first month's rent, but something about her maple brown butter croissants made people forget they were standing on cracked sidewalks. She knew every customer's order by their 3rd visit. Mr. Thompson's sourdough with extra seeds, Maria's chocolate babka for Sunday dinner, the construction crew's dozen glazed at 5:30 sharp. Her pastries became the neighborhood's language of reconciliation. A lemon tart after an argument, cinnamon rolls for new mothers, bread pudding when words failed completely. The morning Grayson Cade walked in, October painted the sky the color of fresh peaches. He stood at her counter in a coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but his eyes held something she hadn't expected: genuine curiosity, not the tourist's patronizing appreciation. "I want something that tastes like the first day of fall," he said, sliding cash across the counter. Instead of a black card, his fingers lingering near hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary. She gave him a chai-spiced apple turnover, still warm from the oven, and watched his face change with the first bite, surprise melting into something close to wonder. For 3 weeks, he returned at inconsistent times but with consistent cash, ordering based on feelings rather than flavors. Something that tastes like rain on concrete. Something that feels like Sunday morning. Something that reminds me why I get up. She began experimenting just for him, creating flavors that matched his abstract requests, and slowly their conversations stretched beyond transactions. He never mentioned his last name, never talked about work, just helped her carry 50-pound flour sacks from delivery trucks and stayed after closing to wipe down tables while she counted the register. The truth arrived through Mrs. Patterson's gossip network faster than any internet search. Grayson Cade, the 31-year-old heir to a tech fortune who'd multiplied his inheritance by investing in communities everyone else ignored. Not the performance charity of his peers, no galas or naming rights, but quiet infrastructure. Recreation centers with actual equipment, small business grants without predatory terms, apartment buildings where rent stayed below market rate. He'd been visiting Harborview for months before he found her bakery, walking the streets his foundation served, learning names instead of demographics. Their courtship unfolded in acts rather than words. He arrived early to help arrange display cases, his expensive shirts getting dusted with flour. She taught him to fold croissant dough, laughing when his first attempts resembled abstract art more than pastry. He brought her a vintage stand mixer from an estate sale, pretending he'd found it cheap when the model hadn't been manufactured since 1952. She hemmed a thrifted dress for his foundation's annual review, her fingers steady despite her racing pulse. They kissed on the pier while fishing boats came in with the tide, salt spray mixing with the sweetness of shared Danish. On cold nights they drank tea in her tiny apartment above the bakery, planning futures that seemed possible in the amber light of her grandmother's lamp. But differences surfaced in small moments that accumulated like hairline cracks in glass. At his foundation's donor dinner, she watched him navigate conversations about impact metrics and sustainable intervention models, while she thought about Mrs. Rodriguez needing insulin. He talked about scale and reach. She knew every customer's grandchild's name. His world required the right optics, carefully curated narratives of progress. Her world demanded showing up with casseroles and bail money, no photographers present. Still, in quiet moments, their dreams aligned, his vision of building something that lasts beyond us. Her coma bakery where morning light made everything look like hope. At a glass-walled museum overlooking the harbor, between paintings worth more than Harborview. His annual income, a single word would be stamped on her life. Unfit, and it would. Hurt more than truth ever could, because it would come from someone who'd claimed to love her completely, then measured that love against his world standards and found her wanting. The service hallway stretched longer than the main gallery, its fluorescent bulbs harsh after the soft spotlights illuminating million-dollar canvases. Imani had stepped away from Grayson's world of champagne flutes and careful laughter, to catch her breath, her rented heels clicking against concrete instead of marble. Through the thin door, voices carried with unexpected clarity a woman wearing a headset, coordinating something. Her tone professional but edged with the casual cruelty of someone who'd forgotten walls could be thin. She's sweet, really, but not a fit for the life he leads. Can you imagine her at the Monaco benefit? And honestly, look at where she's from. Not a fit for motherhood in that circle. These things matter when you're building a legacy. The word landed in Imani's chest like a physical blow, stealing air from her lungs with surgical precision. Unfit. Not the woman's full sentence with its qualifiers and context, not the obvious classism, dressed as concern. Just that single word burning itself into her consciousness. It found every insecurity she'd swallowed while learning which fork to use first. Every moment she'd felt Grayson's world examining her and finding her lacking. Her hands pressed against the cold wall as the hallway seemed to tilt, that word echoing. In the space between heartbeats, growing louder with each repetition her mind created. She found Grayson by the sculpture of intertwined figures, his hand reaching for hers the moment she appeared, but she pulled back, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Someone on your team just called me unfit. Unfit for your life, unfit to be a mother in your world. His face changed instantly, confusion shifting to something darker, but she wasn't finished. Is that what this is? Am I just a phase before you find someone suitable? His response came quickly, defensive. That's not. Imani. Whoever said that doesn't speak for me. We haven't even talked about children yet. That last word, yet, landed between them, like dropped glass, sharp and impossible to take back. It suggested timelines and expectations they'd never discussed, futures planned in boardrooms she'd never enter. They left separately that night, the space between them filled with everything unsaid. 2 months passed in a careful distance that felt like drowning in slow motion. They exchanged texts about safe topics, bakery sales, foundation updates, weather, while avoiding the conversation that waited like a storm system building pressure. Imani threw herself into work, creating new recipes with desperate focus, pretending her period was just late from stress, ignoring the exhaustion that coffee couldn't cure. But standing in a pharmacy bathroom at 7 in the morning, fluorescent light making her reflection look ghostly. She couldn't ignore the 2 pink lines appearing on the white stick, like a verdict being written in real time. Her hand moved to her stomach without thought, fingers spreading across fabric that covered possibility, and she whispered to whoever was listening, maybe the universe, maybe the cluster of cells already dividing with determined purpose, we're okay. Whatever happens, we're going to be okay. The words felt like a promise and a prayer combined, spoken in a bathroom that smelled like industrial cleaner, while outside someone argued with the cashier about expired coupons. This wasn't how she'd imagined this moment, but then nothing about her life had followed the scripts she'd written in her head. Etta didn't need words when Imani appeared at her door that afternoon, just opened her arms and pulled her inside where lavender tea was already steeping, as if she'd known company was coming. They sat on the couch that had witnessed 40 years of neighborhood confessions, and Imani let the truth spill out between sips of tea that tasted like comfort. I'm pregnant, Etta, and I'm scared. Not of the baby, but of everything else, of being labeled before my child even takes a breath. Etta held her while she cried, one weathered hand stroking her hair, humming, something low and wordless that felt like all the mothers who'd come before. The call to Grayson came after 3 drafted texts she deleted, her voice steady when he answered on the second ring. I'm pregnant, she said without preamble, without cushioning. I wanted you to know, but I don't need anything I'm not ready to receive. This isn't about money or resources or whatever your world thinks I lack. This is about a life I'm choosing to protect, with or without anyone's approval. The silence stretched across cellular towers and class divides before he spoke, his voice stripped of its usual confidence. Can I come over, please? Not to plan or fix or manage, just to be there. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. I need to figure out who I am in this story first. The video surfaced 3 weeks later, shot on someone's phone at the museum gala, showing Imani bumping into a server and sending a tray of champagne crashing to the floor. The actual moment lasted 4 seconds, a simple accident in uncomfortable shoes, but the internet stretched it into eternal judgment. Unfit to be a mother, can't even balance a tray, read the caption that accompanied its viral spread, shared by people who'd never struggled in shoes they couldn't afford to own, commented on by strangers who felt entitled to weigh her worth based on a moment of imbalance. The gossip blog post followed within days, somehow obtaining a quote from a hospital note about patient non-compliance. From when she'd questioned a prescription's safety during pregnancy, twisting medical caution into character assassination. The headline, Grayson Cade's baby mama already failing, reduced her to a stereotype while strangers appointed themselves judges of her fitness. Comments accumulated like evidence in a trial she'd never agreed to participate in. Her neighborhood, statistics, her single status, her father's absence, her bank balance estimated and found wanting. Each refresh brought new verdicts from people who'd never held her hand through morning sickness, or watched her teach neighborhood kids to frost cupcakes with architectural precision. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by courier rather than mail, its cream surface expensive enough to feel like an accusation. The paper inside bore the Grayson Cade Foundation letterhead, but the message was personal. Handwritten in his architect's script, a baby shower for Imani and baby Langston Cade. All are welcome. Below, in smaller letters that seemed to hold their breath, I'm sorry. I want to show up. Please let me. The date was circled, the same day as her first custody hearing, because of course the universe would align those particular stars. She called him immediately, her voice sharp with disbelief. You turned my life into an event, my pregnancy into another foundation initiative. His response came carefully, like someone navigating a minefield of his own creation. It's not like that. This is a community shower. Your community. No photographers, no press releases, no donors. Just the people who've been showing up for you long before I existed in your world. If you want me to cancel it, I will. But I thought maybe we could rewrite what fitness means, together, in front of everyone who matters. The invitation trembled in her hand as she considered whether love could be rebuilt on ground that had already shifted, whether showing up now could erase the leaving that came before. Harborview didn't wait for permission to mobilize. The morning after Imani accepted Grayson's invitation, Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on her door with 3 bags of thrift store onesies, washed and folded with lavender sachets tucked between the layers. By noon, Jerome from the barber shop had posted a sign offering free haircuts for any kid attending. The shower, because everybody deserves to look fresh when they're celebrating new life. Zola Martinez, who ran the after-school program in her basement, showed up at warm light with a poster board covered in practical requests, crib assembly, grocery runs, midnight feeding buddies, meal trains, each category waiting for names of volunteers who'd actually show up when the baby came home. The preparation transformed the community center over 3 days. Neighbors bringing what they had, rather than what magazines said was needed. Rhea Johnson, who'd raised twins while working double shifts at the hospital, taped handwritten rules by the door, no advice unless asked. No touching baby without asking mama. No comments about her body, ever. This is a place of support, not performance. The contradictions of neighborhood opinion surfaced in overheard conversations. Some whispered about the mess she got herself into, while teenage voices defended her fiercely, remembering how she'd taught them to make cookies when their own kitchens stayed empty. Love and judgment existed side by side, the way they always did in communities. Small enough that everyone knew your business, but also knew your name. The soft blue dress had belonged to her grandmother, altered to fit Imani's changing shape, the fabric holding memories of Sunday services and special occasions. Etta tied a cream scarf around her shoulders with practiced hands, stepping back to study the effect before nodding with satisfaction. "You look just like your grandma the day she opened her diner," she said, her voice carrying the weight of women who'd built empires from nothing but determination and flour. She was scared too, baby, but she walked in like she belonged because she knew her food was good. Your love is good. Don't let anybody make you forget that. The community center sat on the corner where Harborview met the waterfront, its brick exterior, covered in murals painted by kids who'd grown up and moved away, but left their colors behind. A hand, painted banner stretched above the double doors, "Welcome all families." The letters slightly crooked but vibrant against white fabric. Imani's heart hammered as Etta's car pulled up, her hands instinctively moving to her belly where the baby had started moving in recent weeks, those flutters that felt like questions she didn't have answers for yet. Grayson stood on the steps in jeans and a button, down with sleeves rolled to his elbows, handing bottles of water to early arrivals, sweat already visible at his temple despite the October coolness. He looked different outside his usual context, smaller somehow, more human, stripped of the polish that usually surrounded him like armor. When he saw her, relief and uncertainty crossed his face in equal measure. "If this hurts," he said quietly as she approached, "if any of this feels wrong, tell me and I'll fix what I can fix. I know I can't fix everything, but I want to try." She met his eyes, searching for performance and finding only exhaustion that matched her own. "Don't just talk to me," she said, her voice steady despite the vulnerability of the moment. "Show me. Show all of us what showing up actually looks like when nobody's filming it." The shower unfolded with a beauty that had nothing to do with coordinated decorations or professional photography. Mountains of diapers climbed against one wall, practical and unglamorous. Each package representing someone's budget stretched to include her needs. A basket labeled sock prayers overflowed with tiny pairs, each accompanied by handwritten blessings. "May these feet walk in kindness. May these toes know warmth. May this baby run toward joy." Ria had set up what she called the quiet room, in a corner cordoned by curtains with a rocking chair, dim lamp, and sign reading for feed, rock, breathe. No explanations needed. Zola's ask board drew a crowd immediately, neighbors adding their names next to skills they could offer. Mr. Thompson signed up for crib assembly and 3 midnight feeding buddy shifts. The construction crew committed to building custom shelves for the nursery. Maria claimed every Tuesday meal delivery for the first month. The board filled with names faster than Zola could write categories, proof that community wealth had nothing to do with bank balances and everything to do with people willing to lose sleep for someone else's child. Grayson worked the edges of the event, doing small tasks with focused attention, refilling the coffee urn when it ran low, kneeling to eye level with toddlers who wanted to show him their drawings, quietly redirecting the lifestyle blogger who had somehow found the address by pointing to Ria's rules and asking her to leave. No grand gestures, no speeches, just the steady work of someone trying to earn his place in a room that didn't owe him anything. Imani watched him help an elderly man navigate the buffet line, carrying his plate and asking about dietary restrictions, and felt something shift in her chest, not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of space where forgiveness might eventually grow. The moment Ria called for the blessing circle, conversations quieted into attentive silence. She stood in the center of the room, her presence commanding without raising her voice. "We're going to bless this room the way my mama taught me, with truths for 3 a.m., when the world is dark and the baby won't stop crying and you're sure you're doing everything wrong. Raise your hand if you've got a truth that helped you survive those hours." Hands lifted around the circle, weathered hands and young hands, hands that had rocked dozens of babies and hands that had never changed a diaper. Grayson's hand rose last, trembling slightly, and the room's attention shifted to him with the weight of collective expectation. Would he offer platitudes about cherishing every moment, or speak the kind of truth that only comes from acknowledging your own failures? The silence stretched, waiting for him to choose between the safety of his usual polish and the vulnerability of actual honesty. Imani held her breath, her hand resting on her belly, feeling the baby move, as if it too was waiting to hear what kind of father this man might become. What's one 3 a.m. truth you wish every new parent knew? Drop yours in the comments. We pin the most helpful ones for the community. The blessing circle tightened as people shifted closer. The community center's worn floor creaking under the weight of collective attention. A father with paint-stained hands spoke first, his voice rough with memory. "The truth nobody tells you is that you'll mess up daily and your kid will love you anyway. That grace is terrifying because you don't deserve it, but you better learn to accept it." A teenage mother bounced her 6-month-old on her hip as she added, 3 a.m. Truth? You're going to be so tired you put the bottle in the cabinet and the formula in the fridge. You'll cry about it, then you'll laugh. Both are okay. Zola's contribution came with the authority of someone who'd walked dozens of mothers through postpartum darkness. Some nights, surviving is succeeding. Fed is best. Sleep when you can. Ask for help before you're drowning, not after. Etta stepped forward, her voice carrying the resonance of generations. The hardest truth. You can't protect them from everything, baby. Your job isn't to shield them from the world. It's to love them so completely that they know they're worth fighting for when the world gets hard. That knowledge becomes their armor. Grayson's hand had stayed raised through all of it, and now the room turned to him with expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. He lowered his hand slowly, swallowing hard before speaking, his usual confidence stripped away to reveal something more fragile underneath. My 3 a.m. truth is that I let other people define this story before I even asked what the truth was. I thought providing resources was the same as providing presence, that my foundation work meant I understood the community. When I was just a tourist with a checkbook, I measured fitness by the wrong standards, zip codes and bank statements instead of the only measure. That actually matters, which is showing up when it's inconvenient and nobody's watching. The silence that followed felt different from the ones before, heavier, waiting for something more. He continued, his eyes finding Imani's across the circle. I was afraid of what my world would say about us, So I listen to voices that shouldn't have mattered more than yours. I'm standing here trying to learn what you've known all along, that presence is the only currency that holds value at 3 in the morning when everything's falling apart. I don't know if I'm built for this, but I want the chance to find out. Imani felt every eye shift to her, waiting for her response to his public confession. She took a breath that seemed to draw from somewhere deeper than her lungs, her hand, resting on the swell of her belly where their child moved with increasing frequency. "Then be what you say," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to crack it. "Not today in front of witnesses, but tomorrow when nobody's looking, and the day after that, and the day after that." Apology is just words until it becomes an action repeated so many times it turns into character. The circle dissolved slowly, people moving toward the food tables with the gentle buzz of conversation resuming. But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, a collective exhale as if everyone had been holding their breath, waiting to see if honesty would be met with grace or judgment. Imani navigated through well-wishers and gift-givers, accepting hugs and advice with equal gratitude, until she found herself gravitating toward the quiet room, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of so many people carrying out loud. Grayson appeared in the doorway minutes later, hesitant, waiting for permission to enter. She nodded, and he stepped inside, pulling the curtain closed behind him to create a pocket of privacy in the crowded center. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the party muffled by fabric and distance. "I thought it would feel like a parade," he said finally, staring at his hands. "All these people, the attention, the planning, but it felt like a neighborhood, like being woven into something I didn't create but desperately want to belong to." She studied his profile, looking for performance and finding only genuine confusion. The disorientation of someone discovering their assumptions were built on sand. "That's what community is," she said softly. "It's not something you organize or fund into existence. It's what happens when people decide your struggle is their struggle, your joy is their joy. You can't buy your way in. You have to be invited through the door you kept showing up at." He turned to her then, vulnerability written across features usually so carefully controlled. "Can I?" He gestured toward her belly, the question unfinished but clear. She took his hand and placed it where the baby had been most active, and they both waited in the kind of silence that feels like prayer. The kick came gentle but distinct, a tiny foot or elbow pressing against the wall between worlds, and Grayson's face transformed, wonder replacing uncertainty, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. They laughed together at the strangeness and miracle of it, and he leaned forward to press his forehead against hers, a gesture of tenderness that asked nothing and offered everything. The headlines hit the next morning like a second storm after the first had passed, twisting the previous day's authenticity into fodder for debate and clicks. Billionaire's baby shower, redemption or rebrand, led the gossip sites, accompanied by photos someone had taken, despite Ria's rules. Think pieces multiplied across platforms, dissecting Grayson's motives with the confidence of people who hadn't been in the room. Social media erupted into camps, those who saw genuine change and those convinced everything was calculated. Performance, a PR move designed to rehabilitate his image before custody proceedings began. The comment sections became battlegrounds where strangers fought about Imani's choices as if she owed them explanations, as if her life existed for their entertainment and judgment. "She's being played," wrote people who'd never met her. "He's manipulating the narrative," insisted voices that hadn't heard his confession or seen his hands tremble. The internet, desperate for simple stories with clear villains and victims, couldn't hold space for the complicated truth that people could be both broken and trying, both wrong and willing to change. Imani sat in her apartment above the bakery, watching her phone light up with tags and mentions, the beautiful complexity of yesterday being flattened into headlines that missed the point entirely. The world wanted to know if Grayson's apology was genuine or strategic, as if those categories never overlapped, as if transformation happened in single moments, rather than through the accumulation of small repeated choices. She thought about Etta's words, "Love is what shows up." and realize the internet's verdict didn't matter because the only proof that would count couldn't be photographed or posted. What would you have done in Imani's shoes? Accept the public invite or shut it down? A. Attend on your terms. B. Cancel and keep it private. C. Other. Tell me your move. I'm reading the comments. If apology is just a sentence, a collection of words spoken in a moment of pressure or clarity, can it become a verb, an action repeated until it transforms into character? The question hung in the air of Imani's quiet apartment as her phone continued to buzz with the world's opinions about a story they didn't fully understand. It was time to find out if presence could be learned, if fitness could be redefined, if two people from different worlds could build something that lasted beyond the news cycle's attention span. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, its subject line glowing with the promise of validation and visibility. Exclusive feature, your story, your truth, your terms. $75,000. A lifestyle magazine wanted the full narrative, a photo shoot in the bakery, intimate quotes about the journey. From separation to reconciliation, behind the scenes access to the nursery being prepared above warm light, the money would cover 6 months of lost income during maternity leave, fund upgrades to equipment that wheezed, through morning rush, create the cushion every small business owner dreamed about but rarely achieved. Imani read it twice, her cursor hovering over the reply button, before hitting delete with a force that rattled her laptop. Some stories weren't for sale, and her child's origin wouldn't become content for strangers to consume with their morning coffee. Boundary mattered more than brand, privacy more than profit. Grayson's transformation happened in the unglamorous spaces between headlines and social media posts. He showed up to prenatal classes at the community health center, sitting in folding chairs designed for smaller frames, taking notes in a leather journal that looked absurd next to the photocopied handouts. His questions revealed the gaps in his knowledge. He didn't know about mucus plugs or perineal massage, had never considered the mechanics of breastfeeding or the reality of postpartum bleeding. The other fathers watched him with suspicion that gradually softened into recognition. Wealth couldn't exempt him from the universal terror of keeping a tiny human alive. The crib assembly became a 3-night saga of misread instructions and stripped screws, Grayson's frustration mounting until Imani sat on the floor beside him and showed him how to slow down, how to check each piece, twice before forcing connections that weren't meant to align that way. His attempts at cooking nutritious meals resulted in burnt quinoa and over-salted soup, but he kept trying, showing up in her kitchen with ingredients and humility. He vacuumed without being asked, learned which tea she preferred at different times of day, remembered that she needed her left hip elevated with pillows when she slept on her side. Nurse Talia caught him in the hallway after a particularly difficult appointment where the baby's position had caused concern, his face drawn with worry he was trying to hide. She touched his shoulder with the gentle authority of someone who'd seen every variation of fear that expectant parents carried. "The bar isn't perfect," she said quietly. "It's presence. It's showing up when it's scary, when you don't have answers, when all you can do is hold her hand and breathe with her. That's the work. Everything else is just performance." The power outage came without warning on a Friday evening. The bakery lights flickering once before darkness swallowed the apartment above. Imani heard Grayson's footsteps on the stairs. He'd started keeping a key for emergencies, followed by the strike of a match and the warm glow of candles appearing in the doorway. He'd brought peppermint tea in a thermos, still hot, and they sat on the floor of what would become the nursery, surrounded by half-assembled furniture and unopened boxes of impossibly small clothes. The silence between them felt different than the loaded quiet of their earlier separations. This was the comfortable kind, the space where truth could breathe without performance. Music drifted up from somewhere down the block, something slow and aching, and Grayson stood, offering his hand. They danced in the candlelight with her belly pressed between them, his hand spanning her lower back, her head resting against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat keeping time with hers. The baby moved between them, a third presence in their awkward swaying, and, Grayson laughed softly at the strangeness of dancing with two people at once. "I'm terrified," he said into the dim room, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not of the logistics or the money, or any of the practical things. I'm afraid of being my father, there enough to cast a shadow over everything, never present enough to actually make shade when people needed it. He provided everything except himself, and I grew up rich and empty. What if I don't know how to be different? What if I inherited his inability to be warm?" Imani pulled back enough to see his face in the flickering light, her hand finding his cheek with a tenderness that surprised them both. "Then be light," she said simply. "Not the kind that blinds people or demands they look at you. Be the kind that warms, the kind that helps things grow. You get to choose which parts of him you keep and which parts you leave behind. That choice, that's the inheritance that matters." The decision crystallized over the following weeks as Grayson stepped further, back from spectacle and deeper into the daily maintenance of being useful. He funded a permanent baby closet at the community center, fully stocked with diapers, formula, clothes in, every size, car seats and cribs, but insisted on no plaques, no announcements, no foundation branding. He started attending Zola's planning meetings, talking less and listening more, learning the neighborhood's actual needs rather than assuming he understood them. He stopped trying to fix everything with money and started asking what kind of help would actually be helpful. The foundation's PR team pushed back, arguing that visibility created more funding opportunities, that his personal transformation could inspire corporate responsibility in others. He listened to their presentations about strategic narrative and optimal messaging. Windows, then quietly removed himself from the communications approval chain. Let the foundation's work speak without his face attached to it. Let his presence in Imani's life and his child's life be measured in moments nobody photographed. 3 a.m. Cravings satisfied, ankles massaged when they swelled, appointments never missed. The shoebox arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered to the bakery's back door with no return address, just Imani's name written in handwriting she didn't recognize. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay a single key on a worn string, its brass surface showing the patina of years of use. No note, no explanation, just the key and the faint smell of lavender that made her think of her grandmother. His house, the one that had been sold years ago to settle estate debts she couldn't cover. She turned the key over in her palm, its weight suggesting doors and decisions she couldn't. THC, and something in her chest tightened with the knowledge that support and saving weren't the same thing, that help could arrive wrapped in complications, that the difference between a gift and a trap sometimes depended on who was holding the key. What's one small action that made you feel truly supported in a tough season? Share it so someone else can try it for a friend. Grayson arrived at the bakery that evening with a shoebox in his hands and an expression that looked like someone bracing for impact. Imani set down the tray of cooling scones and gestured him upstairs, her movements slower. Now, at 36 weeks, her body preparing for work she couldn't fully comprehend yet. They sat at her small kitchen table, where so many conversations had unfolded, and he pushed the box across the scarred wood surface with careful deliberation. "The key is to Birch and Laurel," he said, naming the commercial space 3 blocks away that had sat empty for months, its windows papered over with permit notices and real estate contact information. "It's bigger than warm light, with room for actual seating, a full kitchen, storage that doesn't require climbing stairs. The first year is covered, rent, utilities, equipment upgrades, whatever you need. After that, it's yours outright. The deed transfers to your name, regardless of what happens between us." Imani picked up the key, feeling its weight differently now that she understood what it unlocked. Her mind raced through possibilities, the morning light that space would catch, the corner booth, where neighborhood kids could do homework, the commercial oven that could triple her production. But something in the presentation felt rehearsed, calculated, like a solution to a problem she hadn't asked him to solve. "Is this support or saving?" she asked quietly, her eyes meeting his across the table. "Because there's a difference, and the word that matters here is support." He exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping as if releasing tension he'd been carrying since he'd purchased the property. "You're right. I did it again. Saw a need and tried to fix it with resources instead of asking what you actually wanted. I thought I was showing initiative, proving I understood, but I was just being my father again, throwing money at complicated things to make them simpler." He ran his hand through his hair, frustration with himself written in the gesture. "Tell me how to do this right. I'm learning, but I need you to teach me the difference." She turned the key over in her palm, considering not just the offer but the admission that came with it. Support is asking before assuming. It's saying, "I found this space and I think it could work for your vision. What do you think?" Instead of presenting solutions like they're gifts, support leaves room for my agency. Saving takes it away, even when the intentions are good. She set the key on the table between them. "I want to see the space, together. And then I want to decide what I need, not what you think I should have." The following weeks developed a rhythm that felt like building something, sustainable, rather than performing reconciliation for an audience. Grayson showed up after closing with lotion for her swollen ankles, learning the gentle pressure. That helped without hurting, his hands becoming familiar with the geography of her discomfort. His soup experiments improved incrementally, still oversalted, but edible now. Made with vegetables he'd learned she could tolerate despite persistent nausea. Etta's playlist became their shared soundtrack, old gospel and Motown filling the apartment. Above the bakery, like a map of where they'd come from and where they might be heading. They established new protocols based on consent rather than assumption. "Can I touch your belly?" he'd ask before reaching, even when they were alone, understanding that her body belonged to her first, and permission wasn't implied by intimacy. They laughed at their own awkwardness, the formality of asking before every gesture, but the practice created safety that performance never could. He started leaving his phone in the car when he came to her door. His attention undivided, his presence complete rather than fractured by notifications and the constant pull of elsewhere. The birch and laurel space revealed itself slowly, layer by layer, as they peeled back the paper covering its windows and walked through rooms that held possibility. The light did everything she'd hoped, flooding through south-facing glass to illuminate spaces that could become something beautiful with vision and work. They didn't make immediate decisions, just walked and wondered out loud, a hand resting on her belly, while his carried the notebook where he'd started sketching ideas only after asking if she wanted input. If this message about presence over optics needs to reach more people, share this video with someone who could use the reminder today. Someone trying to show up better, someone learning that wealth isn't measured in dollars but in moments that nobody photographs. The prenatal bag appeared by the door at 37 weeks, packed according to the checklist Nurse Talia had provided. Comfortable clothes that opened. In front, toiletries, phone charger, snacks that wouldn't upset her stomach. A going-home outfit for a baby she couldn't yet fully believe was real. The car seat installation became an afternoon event, Grayson watching instructional videos on his phone, while Mr. Thompson provided commentary from decades of experience, both men sweating despite the autumn chill until the seat finally clicked into place with the satisfying sound of something done correctly. Their last quiet evening arrived without announcement, just the two of them, folding impossibly small onesies while rain drummed against the windows. They'd stopped trying to predict the future, stopped making promises about forever, and settled instead into the present moment, this laundry, this laughter, this shared fear of everything that was coming. He told her about his father's funeral, how empty the cathedral had felt despite hundreds of attendees, how he'd realized that a legacy of buildings and donations meant nothing if the people who mattered most were strangers. She told him about her grandmother's last days, how she'd made Imani promise to build something that fed people's spirits as well as their bodies, how every pastry was an attempt to honor that promise. The contractions started on a Thursday morning when the sky hung low and silver with the promise of storms, that particular quality of light that made everything feel suspended between states. Imani woke to pressure that was different from the practice contractions she'd been having for weeks. These had purpose, a gathering intensity that suggested beginnings rather than false alarms. She breathed through the first few alone, timing them on her phone, waiting to see if they'd establish a pattern or fade like the others had. By the time she called Etta, the intervals had shortened to 7 minutes, then 6, the pain radiating from her lower back around to the front, in waves that demanded her complete attention. Etta arrived with the kind of calm that only comes from having walked this road before, grabbing the bag by the door while calling Grayson with instructions rather than requests. He appeared within minutes, his hands steady as he helped Imani down the stairs, his voice low and encouraging. "You're doing it. You're already doing it. Just keep breathing." The car ride to the hospital passed in a compression of time, contractions coming. Faster now, Imani's hand gripping Grayson's with strength that surprised them both. Etta drove with the confidence of someone who'd made this journey before. Her voice steady with reminders to breathe, to focus, to trust the body's ancient knowledge. They pulled up to the entrance as another contraction peaked, and Grayson's steady hands guided her toward the doors that would open onto the most transformative hours of their lives. The delivery room existed in its own dimension, where time moved differently, measured, not in minutes but in contractions, in the space between one breath and the next. Grayson stood on Imani's left side. Etta anchored her right, both of them, providing the kind of presence that couldn't be delegated or purchased. He counted breaths with her through each wave of pain, his voice steady even when his hands trembled, learning in real time that supporting someone through agony meant staying present in your own discomfort without making it about you. Etta wiped Imani's forehead with a cool cloth, her decades of experience translating into small acts of comfort that required no instruction. Ice chips offered at exactly the right moment. Pressure applied to her lower back when the pain seemed impossible to survive. Words of encouragement. That carried the authority of someone who'd walked this path and emerged transformed. Between contractions, Grayson pressed kisses to Imani's knuckles, his lips finding the hand. That gripped his with strength that would leave bruises he'd wear like badges of honor. The midwives moved through the room with the quiet competence of people who'd witnessed this miracle enough times to respect it without romanticizing the brutality. They checked monitors and offered position suggestions, their voices calm even when Imani's rose in desperation. Even when she swore she couldn't do this anymore, couldn't push again, couldn't survive another contraction. "You're already doing it," the lead midwife said gently. "Your body knows exactly what to do. We're just here to catch." The hours stretched and compressed simultaneously, labor progressing with its own timeline that respected no clock or schedule. Imani walked the halls when she could, leaning heavily on Grayson during contractions that stopped her mid-step, her breath coming in controlled counts that barely contained the pain radiating through her entire body. Etta followed with water and encouragement, her presence a constant reminder that women had been doing this since the beginning of time, that Imani's body carried ancient knowledge even when her mind felt lost in the intensity. Transition hit like a wall, the contractions coming so close together that rest between them became impossible, the pain reaching levels that made her previous understanding of discomfort seem laughable. She vomited into a basin that Grayson held without flinching, his other hand rubbing circles on her back, his voice in her ear reminding her that this meant the end was close, that soon she'd meet the person she'd been growing for 9 months. Etta prayed quietly in Spanish, words Imani didn't understand but felt in her bones, ancient rhythms that connected this moment to every birth that had come before. The urge to push arrived with undeniable force, her body taking over in ways that left no room for doubt or hesitation. The midwives guided her into position, Grayson supporting one leg while Etta took the other, both of them bearing witness to the raw power of what her body was accomplishing. The pushing felt like trying to turn herself inside out, like every cell in her body was committed to this singular purpose of bringing new life into a world that had already labeled her unfit before her child took her first breath. Grayson's voice stayed steady in her ear. "You're so strong, you're incredible, you're doing it," while Etta's hand never left her shoulder, grounding her when the pain threatened to scatter her completely. The midwife's voice cut through the haze. "The head is crowning, Imani. Reach down and feel." Her hand moved to touch the top of her baby's head, warm and wet and impossibly real, and something shifted. In her chest, terror transforming into determination, exhaustion finding reserves she didn't know existed. 3 more pushes, each one feeling like it would split her apart, each one bringing her closer to meeting the person who'd been kicking her ribs and keeping her awake for months. And then, in a moment that split time into before and after, a cry pierced the air, raw and indignant and absolutely perfect. The relief was immediate and overwhelming, her body releasing tension. She'd been carrying for hours, for months, maybe for her entire life. The baby was placed on Imani's chest, still covered in vernix and blood, and the evidence of the journey they'd just completed together, and the tears that came needed no apology or explanation. Grayson wept openly, his forehead pressed against Imani's temple, one hand carefully, supporting the tiny head that seemed impossibly fragile against Imani's skin. Etta cried the way grandmothers do, with joy layered over relief, layered over the bittersweet ache of time. His passage, her hand resting on both Imani and the baby, as if blessing them both into this new chapter. The midwives gave them space to exist in that sacred first meeting, those moments, when 3 became a family in ways that paperwork could never capture. The baby's eyes tried to focus, searching for the face that matched the voice she'd been hearing from the inside for 9 months. Tiny fingers wrapped around Imani's thumb with surprising strength, and the world contracted to just this: skin on. Skin, heartbeat synchronizing with heartbeat, the smell of new life mixing with the exhaustion and wonder of birth. Noor, Imani whispered, the name emerging from somewhere deep, from her, grandmother's favorite song about morning breaking after long darkness. It means light. The baby, Noor, quieted at the sound of her mother's voice, as if recognizing the vibrations that had accompanied her entire existence until now. Grayson repeated the name like a prayer, like a promise, like the beginning of a story he was finally ready to write with presence instead of performance. His finger traced the delicate features of his daughter's face, the tiny nose, the pursed lips, the eyes that would eventually reveal their color. The golden hour passed in a haze of skin-to-skin contact, the first attempt at breastfeeding guided by patient hands, the measurements and assessments that confirmed Noor was healthy and whole. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, 20 inches long. Perfect APGAR scores, numbers that would be recorded in baby books and medical records, but the real measurements couldn't be quantified. The weight of responsibility settling on shoulders already tired, the expansion of hearts to hold love that felt too big for human bodies to contain. The first night in the hospital room passed in fragments of sleep, interrupted by nurses, checking vitals and Noor's needs making themselves known with increasing volume. Grayson slept in the chair that converted into something resembling a bed, his body contorted in ways that would leave him sore for days, but he refused Imani's suggestion that he go home and rest properly. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he said simply, and something in Imani's chest loosened at the truth in those words. The first weeks at home unfolded in exhaustion so complete it became its own altered state, where day and night blurred into a continuous cycle of feeding and changing and trying to decode cries that all sounded the same until suddenly they didn't. The community's support materialized in practical acts that made survival possible. Zola's night feed buddy text, chain that meant someone was always awake when Imani needed to know she wasn't alone at 3 a.m. The barber, offering rides to pediatric appointments when Imani was too tired to trust herself behind the wheel. The pediatric nurse who'd given them her personal number for the panicked questions that arrived between scheduled checkups. The word unfit began to seem absurd when measured against the ordinary faithfulness of their daily routine. Grayson learned to rock Noor with one foot while his hands stacked cookie sheets for the bakery's morning rush, his body finding the rhythm that soothed her back to sleep while making himself useful in ways that mattered. He changed diapers with the focused concentration of someone defusing bombs, studied the differences between hungry cries and tired cries like they were a language he was determined to master, wore spit-up on expensive shirts without bothering to change, because what was the point when the next feeding was an hour away? Imani watched him from the bed where she was supposed to be resting, her body slowly healing from the trauma of birth, and felt something settle in her chest that she'd been holding tense for months. This was the man who'd hurt her with his absence, yes, but he was also the man learning to show up in the unglamorous hours when love was measured in ounces consumed and diapers changed. Both things could be true. People could fail and then choose differently. The question was never whether he'd be perfect. It was whether he'd keep choosing presence over the easier option of throwing money at problems and calling it love. The relay of support extended beyond their apartment walls, neighbors stopping by with food that could be eaten one-handed, Maria organizing a meal train that ensured hot dinners appeared at their door every evening for the first month, Mr. Thompson installing a video monitor system that let Imani see Noor from anywhere in the apartment. The foundation Grayson had built became a resource he barely mentioned, its work continuing without his constant oversight, proof that real change didn't require his face attached to every initiative. Etta held Noor with the ease of someone who'd rocked generations, her weathered hands supporting the infant's head with perfect confidence, while Imani showered for the first time in 3 days, and Grayson attempted to fold laundry. According to the system, Imani had tried to explain multiple times. "You two are going to be fine," Etta said to the baby, her voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "Your mama's got backbone made of steel and heart made of honey. Your daddy's learning that love is a verb, not a transaction. And you're going to grow up knowing the difference." The nights remained brutal. That particular exhaustion that comes from being needed constantly by someone who can't verbalize what they need. Grayson took the first shift after Imani's midnight feeding, walking circles around the apartment with Noor against his shoulder, humming songs he half remembered from his own childhood, learning that sometimes the only thing required was presence and patience. He sent photos to the night feed buddy chat, proof of life, solidarity with other parents surviving the same hours, and received back encouragement and advice that came from experience rather than books. Noor's first smile arrived at 6 weeks, a genuine response rather than gas, and Grayson happened to be the one holding her when it transformed her face. He called Imani over with barely contained excitement, and they both stared at their daughter like she'd performed a miracle, which, in a way, she had. The miracle of connection, of recognition, of a personality, beginning to emerge from the bundle of needs they'd been tending. They took a dozen photos trying to capture it, but the real image was written in their memories, the moment when parenting shifted from survival to relationship. The pediatrician appointments became less fraught as they learned what was normal and what required concern. Noor gained weight steadily, hit her milestones within the expected windows, showed no signs of the deficiencies that poverty was supposed to guarantee according to the people who'd labeled Imani unfit. Dr. Okafor, who'd been practicing in Harborview for 20 years, noticed the dynamic between Imani and Grayson during the 2-month checkup, the way they coordinated without speaking, how he deferred to her on feeding questions while she trusted his observations about sleep patterns. "You two are doing the work," Dr. Okafor said, after examining Noor and finding her thriving. "Not the performance of parenting, but the actual work. That's rarer than you'd think, especially among couples navigating your particular circumstances." She didn't elaborate on what she meant by particular circumstances, but they understood. The class divide, the public scrutiny, the labels that had been applied before Noor took her first breath. The doctor's validation mattered less than the evidence they could see themselves, but it still felt good to have someone with authority acknowledge what they were building. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, hand-delivered by courier, its envelope expensive but the handwriting shaky. Vivian Chen, the PR coordinator, whose voice had labeled Imani unfit through a thin service hallway door, had written 3 pages of confession and accountability. She detailed the conversation Imani had overheard, owned the classism and casual cruelty of her assessment, explained that becoming a mother herself had shattered every assumption she'd made about fitness and worth. The letter's middle section traced her own journey, a difficult pregnancy that ended in premature birth, weeks in the NICU where her resources couldn't prevent her daughter's struggle to breathe, The moment she'd realized that every mother she'd judged had been doing the same thing. She was trying to keep a tiny human alive against odds that didn't care about bank balances. She described the shame that had come with recognition, how her words had haunted her during 3 a.m. feedings when she felt utterly inadequate despite having every advantage money could buy. The final paragraph held a request, permission to volunteer at the community center's baby closet, to learn from the people she'd dismissed, to try to become someone who measured value differently than she'd been taught. She acknowledged that Imani owed her nothing, not forgiveness, not absolution, not access to the community she'd insulted. But she was asking anyway, because accountability required more than private guilt, required putting herself in spaces where her previous judgments would be visible and her new learning could be witnessed. Imani read the letter twice while Noor slept in her bassinet, Grayson looking over her shoulder, both of them silent with the weight of decision. Forgiveness wasn't a single choice but an ongoing practice, and accountability required more than words on expensive stationery. The community that had claimed her before judgment, that had showed up with diapers and rides and 3 a.m. texts, would they have space for someone who'd caused harm but was asking to learn differently? "What are you thinking?" Grayson asked quietly, careful not to influence her decision with his own opinion. Imani set the letter down, her eyes moving to Noor's sleeping face, so peaceful in the afternoon light filtering through the window. "I'm thinking that if we only extend grace to people who never needed it, then grace becomes just another luxury good. But I'm also thinking that my community gets to decide, not just me. This isn't my forgiveness to give alone. It belongs to everyone who was dismissed by that worldview." They brought the letter to the next community center planning meeting, Imani reading it aloud, while Zola, Ria, Mr. Thompson, and a dozen others listened with expressions ranging from skepticism to cautious openness. The discussion that followed was honest and sometimes heated, voices rising as people debated whether accountability could coexist with access, whether someone who'd caused harm could be trusted in spaces designed to serve the people she'd judged. Ria, whose rules had governed the baby shower, spoke last. "My mama used to say that the door to change has to be narrow enough that you can't bring your old baggage through it, but wide enough that you can actually fit if you're willing to leave that baggage behind." We put her on probation. She shows up. She does the work nobody wants to do. She listens more than she talks. We watch her actions, not her words. After 6 months, we decide together if she's learning or performing. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it carried. Vivian would be allowed to volunteer under strict conditions, her presence conditional on sustained effort rather than good intentions. Imani drafted the response that night, Grayson rocking Noor, while she found words that balanced accountability with possibility. Imani's reply to Vivian arrived 3 days after the community meeting, handwritten, on bakery stationery that still carried the faint scent of cinnamon and vanilla. The response was neither warm nor cold, just direct in the way that truth often is when stripped of performance. "We accept help here. We also accept accountability. Those aren't the same thing, but they can exist together when someone is willing to do the work of transformation rather than just talk about it. Show up to the community center every Saturday for the next 6 months. Do the work nobody. Photographs, sorting donations, cleaning changing tables, restocking supplies. Listen more than you speak. Learn from people you previously dismissed. After 6 months, the community will decide together whether your actions match your words. This isn't my forgiveness to give. It belongs to all of us." She signed it simply, folded it into an envelope, and mailed it without ceremony or expectation. Whether Vivian would actually show up, whether her accountability would outlast her guilt, remained to be seen. But the offer itself represented something important, the acknowledgement that people could change if they were willing to do the unglamorous work that transformation required, that grace could coexist with boundaries, that accountability meant action sustained over time rather than apologies offered in moments of crisis. The new warm light bakery at Birch and Laurel opened on a Saturday morning in early spring. 6 months after Noor's birth, the space transformed through collective effort rather than hired contractors. The neighborhood had shown up with paintbrushes and muscle, Mr. Thompson installing shelving with precision learned, Over decades, Zola organizing the work crews with the efficiency of someone used to coordinating chaos into productivity. Grayson had funded the renovation, but the vision was entirely Imani's, from the layout that encouraged, lingering to the menu board written in her grandmother's handwriting, photographed and enlarged. The south-facing windows flooded the space with light that made the pastries glow like edible art, and the corner booth that Imani had envisioned became real, a space where kids could spread homework while adults lingered over coffee, that cost what they could afford rather than what the market would bear. The pricing was transparent and flexible. Listed prices for those who could pay them, pay what you can for those who couldn't, and the weekly no questions tray for anyone who needed food without the transaction. Opening day brought lines that wrapped around the block, neighbors who'd supported Imani through pregnancy and early motherhood, now celebrating her expansion with their presence and their dollars. Noor slept in a carrier against Imani's chest while she worked the register, her daughter's warmth a constant reminder of why all of this mattered. Grayson worked the floor, refilling coffee and bussing tables, his expensive education never mentioning that some of the most important work involved cleaning up after others. The weekly no questions tray appeared every Thursday at closing, filled with whatever hadn't sold that day plus intentional extras, fresh loaves baked specifically for the tray, pastries made with the same care as the ones sold at full price, dignity baked into every item. Imani left it on a table by the door with a simple sign, "Take what you need." Community feeds community. Nobody monitored who took what or how much, no forms to fill out or proof of need required. Just food offered with the dignity of choice rather than the shame of charity. The first month, the tray was emptied within an hour of being set out. The second month, people started leaving things too. A jar of homemade jam, a bag of fresh vegetables from someone's garden, a box of diapers with a note saying for whoever needs them next. The tray became a physical manifestation of reciprocity, proof that poverty didn't mean people had nothing to give, just that what they had to offer might look different than what wealthier communities brought to the table. Thursday afternoons found Grayson in the corner booth, reading to whoever showed up, his voice bringing stories to life. For kids whose parents were working multiple shifts, whose home libraries consisted of whatever the school sent home. Noor slept in her carrier, or sat on his lap as she got older, her presence a reminder that privilege wasn't inherent, but inherited, and what you did with that inheritance determined whether it became a wall or a bridge. He'd learned the rhythm of the neighborhood, when to speak and when to listen, when to offer resources and when to just show up with presence and attention. The kids called him Mr. G and corrected his pronunciation when he stumbled over names from cultures he was still learning about. Their parents watched him with a careful assessment of people who'd been disappointed by well-meaning outsiders before, waiting to see if his commitment would outlast his guilt or novelty. 6 months into the routine, one of the mothers approached him after story time. "You're still here," she said, the observation carrying layers of meaning. "Most people like you come to feel good about themselves, take some pictures, and disappear when they remember they have easier options. But you keep showing up even when nobody's paying attention anymore." Grayson adjusted Noor in his arms, considering his response carefully. "I'm learning that showing up is the only thing that actually matters. Everything else is just noise. My daughter is going to grow up in this neighborhood, know these people, build her life on this foundation. That makes it personal in ways that charity work never could." The reporter who arrived one Thursday afternoon wasn't invited, just appeared during story time with questions designed to resurrect old headlines and manufacture new drama. She positioned herself near the corner booth with a recording device barely concealed, her tone sympathetic in the way that often precedes ambush. She waited until Grayson had finished the book and the kids had scattered, to the pastry counter before approaching, with her microphone extended. "Mr. Cade, 6 months ago there were serious questions about whether you and Mrs. Langston were fit to parent together given your class differences and public conflicts. How does it feel to prove people wrong?" The question hung in the air, designed to elicit either defensiveness or triumph, either of which would make good copy. Before Grayson could respond, Imani appeared from the kitchen, Noor now awake and fussing against his chest. She took her daughter with the practiced ease of months of coordination, settling into nursing while meeting the reporter's eyes with calm directness. "You're making assumptions that aren't accurate," she said quietly. "We're not proving anyone wrong. We're just doing the work that all parents do. Showing up every day, making mistakes, trying again. The question was never whether we were fit. The question was whether people could see past their own biases about what fitness looks like." The reporter pressed forward, sensing an angle. "But you have to admit that the public scrutiny, the viral video calling you unfit, the questions about your relationship, those made your journey harder than most new parents face." Imani shifted Noor to her other side, completely unbothered by having this conversation while breastfeeding. Completely unwilling to hide the reality of motherhood for the comfort of others. "Motherhood isn't a brand to defend or a narrative to control," she said, her voice steady with the confidence of someone who'd stopped seeking external validation. "It's a relationship. It's work that doesn't end when people stop watching. It's showing up when the bread burns and when it rises, when your child is sleeping peacefully and when they've been screaming for 3 hours and you don't know why." She glanced toward Grayson, who was now wiping down tables while keeping one eye on them, his presence steady even when he wasn't the center of attention. "The question was never whether I was fit. The question was whether the people in my life would show up when it got hard. He's here. My community is here. We're doing the work together, and that's the only verdict that matters. Your headline doesn't change how Noor gets fed or who shows up for her. Pediatrician appointments. Reality is built in moments nobody photographs, and that's where we're focused." The reporter tried a few more questions, but Imani had said what she needed to say and returned to the kitchen, leaving. The journalist, with footage that wouldn't fit neatly into the redemption narrative she'd been hoping to construct. Some stories resisted simplification because they were too busy being lived, too occupied with the daily work of showing up to worry about how they appeared from the outside. Love, Imani had learned through the fire of becoming a mother in a world that bet against her, was not a statement made in moments of clarity or crisis. Love was a schedule, the 3 a.m. feeding that came whether you were ready or not, the pediatrician appointments marked on the calendar with the same importance as business meetings, the meal prep that happened on Sunday so weekday mornings didn't become chaos, the coffee made exactly right because someone paid attention to how you took it. Love was knowing which lullaby worked when nothing else would, which shoulder pressure eased the tension, which silence meant comfort and which meant something was wrong. Presence, she'd discovered, beat optics every single time. The internet could debate Grayson's motives endlessly, could dissect his transformation for authenticity, could measure his fitness by standards. That had nothing to do with whether he showed up at 2 in the morning, when Noor had a fever and Imani was too exhausted to think straight. But presence didn't photograph well, couldn't be captured in the frozen moment of a social media post existed, only in the accumulated weight of days and nights when nobody was watching, and the work still got done. The difference between support and saving had become clear through practice and mistakes, through offers made and sometimes refused, through learning to ask "what do you need?" instead of assuming the answer. Support lifted while leaving agency intact. Saving swooped in and took control under the guise of help. Support said, "I see you struggling, and I'm here if you want company or assistance." Saving said, "I see you struggling and I know better, so let me fix it." The gap between those approaches was where dignity lived or died, where relationships became partnerships or performances. Community, Imani had learned, could drown out even the cruelest headline when it chose to show up louder than criticism. One ride to the clinic when her car wouldn't start. One meal delivered when she was too tired to cook. One crib assembled by hands that had built dozens before. One key offered not as rescue but as resource, with her name on the deed and her vision guiding the transformation. These small acts accumulated into a foundation stronger than any individual could build alone, proof that wealth existed in forms that never appeared on tax returns. The morning Vivian showed up at the community center's baby closet for her first volunteer shift, she came empty-handed except for accountability and the willingness to be directed rather than to direct. Ria put her to work immediately, sorting donations by size, checking car seat, expiration dates, restocking shelves with the unglamorous efficiency the work required. No speeches, no grand gestures of penance, just hours of labor that served. Families she'd once dismissed as unfit based on zip codes and assumptions. The other volunteers watched her with open skepticism, their conversations pausing when she entered the room, resuming only after assessing whether she was performing contrition or actually doing the work. She didn't try to explain herself or defend her previous worldview, just showed up on time, did what was asked, and left when her shift ended. Whether that work would become transformation or just performance remained to be seen, would be proven only through consistency that outlasted guilt. By the third month, Vivian had stopped wearing her expensive jewelry to volunteer shifts, had learned which families needed which sizes, could assemble a pack and play in under 5 minutes. She still didn't speak much, seemed to understand that she was there to learn rather than to be rehabilitated through participation. The community's assessment of her would come at 6 months, based on actions accumulated rather than intentions declared. Grayson's journey from the man who'd let others define his story to the father who showed up, regardless of optics, happened in increments too small to make headlines but significant enough to change lives. He'd learned to check his assumptions at the door, to ask before assuming, to value the expertise of people who'd been doing this work long before he arrived with resources. His foundation continued its work, but he'd stepped back from the spotlight, let the programs speak, louder than his name, measured success by changed circumstances rather than press coverage. The family they were building, Imani, Grayson, and Noor, didn't look like the glossy magazine version of reconciliation and happily ever after. It looked like exhaustion and laughter in equal measure, like arguments about the right way to fold onesies and agreements about what mattered more than being right. It looked like Etta showing up on Sunday mornings so they could both sleep an extra hour, like Zola texting advice about teething. At midnight, like Mr. Thompson building a toy box from reclaimed wood, because every child deserved a place to put their dreams. The story that had started with a label, Unfit, had been rewritten not through defiance but through the quiet. Accumulation of days lived well, of love demonstrated through presence rather than proclaimed through words. Fitness, it turned out, had nothing to do with bank balances or zip codes or the kind of polish that photographed well. Fitness was showing up when it was hard, staying present when leaving would be easier, choosing the relationship over the optics every single time. On Noor's first birthday, the community gathered at Birch and Laurel for a celebration that looked nothing like the baby shower that had preceded it. No formal invitations, no curated guest list, just open doors and the understanding that anyone who'd shown up for this family over the past year was welcome. The bakery filled with people who'd carried Imani through the hardest chapters of her life, who taught Grayson what presence actually meant, who'd proven that community wealth couldn't be measured by any bank. Noor took her first steps that day, wobbling from Imani's arms into Grayson's waiting hands, and the cheer that erupted felt like collective triumph. This child, who'd been labeled unfit before birth, who'd been used as evidence in arguments about class and worthiness, was just a 1-year-old learning to walk, oblivious to the narratives that had surrounded her arrival. She knew only that when she fell, hands caught her. When she cried, voices soothed her. When she smiled, the whole room lit up. Etta watched from her seat by the window, tears streaming down her face, as she witnessed the fulfillment of her own prophecy from a year ago. Love is what shows up, she'd said, and here was the evidence, a room full of people who'd shown up through pregnancy complications and sleepless nights, through public judgment and private doubts, through all the moments that tested whether commitment was real or just performance. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Drop your biggest takeaway in the comments. I want to know what landed for you, what you're carrying forward from Imani and Grayson's journey. And subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories so you never miss these powerful lessons that come straight from real life. Your engagement, your likes, your comments, your shares helps these messages reach the people who need them most. Be part of spreading stories that matter. Stories that challenge how we measure worth and fitness and love. What does love is what shows up look like in your world? Give me one sentence in the comments. I'm reading every single one, and I'll pin the most powerful responses so this community can learn from each other. This is Mr. Steele Rich Stories, where we don't just tell stories, we extract the lessons that transform how you see the world and how you move through it. Imani Langston proved that fitness isn't measured by wealth but by the willingness to show up when nobody's watching, when it's hard, when easier options exist. Grayson Cade learned that presence beats performance every time. That transformation happens in unglamorous moments, repeated until they become character. And their community demonstrated that the most powerful resource isn't money. It's people who choose to carry each other's weight without keeping score. The labels the world tries to stamp on us, unfit, inadequate, less than, they only stick if we let them define our actions. Imani could have internalized that word, could have let it shape her into someone defensive and small. Instead, she let her actions speak louder than anyone's judgment, built a life that proved fitness, had nothing to do with zip codes and everything to do with showing up every single day. If you're still here, you're part of this family. You're someone who values substance over spectacle, who understands that real transformation happens in the accumulation of small choices rather than grand gestures. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their circumstances don't define their worth, that presence is the only currency that actually matters, that community can be built anywhere people decide to show up for each other. The final lesson here is simple but profound. Love is not what you say in moments of clarity or what you promise in moments of passion. Love is what shows up when it's 3 in the morning and nobody's watching. Love is the schedule you keep, the presence you maintain, the work you do when it would be easier to walk away. That's the love that builds families, transforms communities, and rewrites every story that tried to label you as less than you are. Until next time, keep showing up, keep being present. Keep rewriting the stories the world tries to write about you. This is Mr. Steele Rich Stories, and I'll see you in the next one.